It was supposed to be just an innocent task, helping with the repairs. But when Dean walked into the house covered in dust and with drops of sweat on his temples, I realized it would be impossible to resist. We both knew it was a mistake. But as the hot jets of water mingled with our bodies in the shower, everything that had been wrong before suddenly became the most desirable and forbidden. Love? No, it was something else. Something more primal and dangerous.
Thank you for watching my channel. I create videos for your enjoyment. Please subscribe if you want to support my efforts, it's very important to me. I apologize in advance for any mistakes, dubbing is done by neural network. Please point out mistakes in the comments so I can correct them.
I've always been a faithful wife. Gregor worked a lot, often went away on business trips, and I took care of the house, keeping it cozy and in order. Our marriage was, as it seemed from the outside, perfect stability, mutual understanding, respect. But over time something changed. Maybe it was the routine that was slowly eating away at our relationship, or my own loneliness filling every corner of the empty house. When Gregor announced that his nephew Dean was coming over to help with the renovations, I didn't give it much thought. The bathroom tiles were cracked and the living room walls needed a fresh coat of paint. Gregor was busy, and sending Dean seemed like a logical solution. The first thing I noticed when I opened the door was the look in his eyes. He was looking at me like no one had looked at me in a long time. Maybe it was just my imagination, but that look took my breath away. Dean looked nothing like I remembered him. The last time I'd seen him had been years ago, when he'd been a teenager, skinny and gangly. Now he was a tall man with strong arms and confidence in his every move. He seemed stronger and more confident, perhaps that confidence was what fascinated me. "Hi, Aunt Emily," his voice was a little rough, but there was a slight playfulness to it. "Gregor said this place needs a lot of work. Where shall we start?" I led him into the house, feeling my heart beating faster than usual. We talked for a while about what needed to be done, changing the tiles, painting the walls, and I suggested he start with the bathroom. Things were going along, but the moment Dean took off his t-shirt so he wouldn't get paint on it, I felt a strange tension. His muscles played under his skin, and drops of sweat glistened on his chest. I couldn't stop looking at him. He seemed to notice my gaze, and the corners of his lips twitched in a faint smile. This isn't right, I thought, trying to suppress what was starting to slowly surface. But with every move he made, every step he took, I could feel something inside me awakening. The pull was too strong. "Emily, why don't you show me where the shower tools are?" His question snapped me out of my thoughts. I nodded and went to the closet, but barely had my back turned when I felt his proximity. When I reached out to get what I needed, he stood behind me so close I could feel his breath on my neck. We froze for a split second, and that moment seemed to last forever. "Emily," his voice sounded almost a whisper. I turned to face him and our gazes met. In that moment, all the barriers I'd worked so hard to build crumbled. The first time it happened, I couldn't even realize the full magnitude of what had happened. We were in a bathroom that had just begun renovations, amongst tools and tile. His hand slid around my waist, and I let myself give in to the moment, forgetting everything. The shower turned on and warm jets of water washed over us, erasing the last vestiges of doubt. It happened so fast that I barely had time to realize I was in his arms. The water ran down our bodies and his lips found mine. The passion that had been building up inside me for months burst out. There was no room for tenderness in his kiss. It was something wild, unbridled, as if we both knew time was short and we had to have everything. His hands traveled down my body, sending waves of pleasure through me. I could feel the tension in his muscles transferring to me, making me forget everything but this moment. The water continued to flow, mixing with our breathing, and I realized that this wasn't just physical attraction. It was something much deeper, something that had been smoldering inside of me for a long time. When I opened my eyes the next morning, reality came in waves. I was lying in bed alone, and yesterday's moments, every kiss, every touch from Dean, echoed in my head. My head was spinning with the realization of what had happened. I'd betrayed Gregor, destroyed what I thought was unbreakable. But what scared me even more was that I felt no regret. Instead, there was a strange sense of relief and contentment in my chest. My routine, which had seemed gray and suffocating, was suddenly ripped to shreds. I stood up and looked in the mirror. My eyes were slightly red from lack of sleep, my hair tangled. But inside, I felt like I looked different. Last night had awakened something new in me. I was no longer the dutiful wife who waited years for attention from her husband. I was a woman who broke all the rules. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. I flinched, my heart quickened. Emily, it was Dean. His voice sounded muffled, with the same confidence as yesterday. I opened the door and the very man I couldn't resist yesterday was in front of me again. His gaze was serious, but in his eyes I saw what I felt, no regret. "I think we need to talk," he said quietly. We sat at the kitchen table and I didn't know where to start. How do you explain something you don't fully understand? But Dean seemed to know what to say. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he began. "I wasn't going to." "Neither did I interrupted him. "But it did." We both fell silent, the tension in the air building. I tried to concentrate on something else, the sound of the kettle, the sunlight streaming through the window. But my thoughts kept coming back to him, to the way his hands had held me in the shower yesterday, the way the water ran down our naked bodies. "What now?" I finally asked. Dean met my gaze. There was no hesitation in his eyes, just determination. "I don't know. But I can't just walk away like nothing happened. I want you." His words sounded like a blow. I wanted to object, to say that this was a mistake, that it had to end, but instead my lips spoke. "Me too." From that day on, our meetings with Dean became something inevitable. It was like we were trapped in our own attraction, where every touch only increased the fire between us. He'd come over to help with the renovations, but each time it ended up being much more than just changing tiles or painting the walls. Our secret moments passed quickly, almost in passing, but they were filled with such passion that I couldn't stop. We both realized we were playing with fire. I couldn't get Gregor out of my mind, my husband, who trusted me, who didn't suspect that something terrible was happening in his own home. But the more I thought about it, the more another side of me flared up. I wanted Dean in a way I'd never wanted anyone else. One day, when Gregor was on a business trip, Dean and I met in the same bathroom where it had all started. This time it was different. We weren't in a hurry, we weren't hiding for fear of being caught. The water in the shower rushed over our bodies again, and I felt each stream wash away my guilt, leaving only desire. "I can't stop," I whispered, feeling his touch. "I just can't." He answered silently, his hands continuing to explore my body as if each time was the first time. These moments felt like something forbidden, but that only made them more desirable. Each time I thought it would be the last time, that I should stop, but the passion I felt for Dean left no chance for reason. Everything changed the day Gregor came home early. I knew he had to stay on a business trip for 2 more days, so Dean and I were sure no one would find out. But fate had decided otherwise. I heard the sound of the front door when Dean and I were in the kitchen. My blood froze in my veins, my heart hammering in my throat. I didn't even have time to move away from Dean when Gregor appeared in the hallway. He froze in place, staring at us. His face reflected every emotion at once: shock, pain, anger. I saw his gaze shift from me to Dean and everything inside me clenched. I'd betrayed him, and it was all too obvious. "Emily?" His voice was hoarse, full of bewilderment and pain. I didn't know what to say. The words stuck in my throat, and only silence filled the room. The moment seemed like an eternity. Dean and I froze like 2 criminals caught in the act. Gregor didn't move, as if he were chained to the floor, and I couldn't find the strength to take even one step forward. I said, "Emily, what's going on here?" Gregor's voice trailed off, a little louder than he probably meant it to be. Dean took a step back, as if hoping it would help erase what had happened. But what had already been done couldn't be undone. I tried to pull myself together, to find the words to explain. But explain what? That I'd cheated with his nephew? That it was all a mistake, even though it had happened more than once? "Gregor," I began, but my voice treacherously shook. He took a step forward, and in his eyes I could see the storm raging, a mixture of pain and rage. His face turned pale, and his jaw clenched so tight that the veins in his cheekbones were showing. He looked at me, but I felt like I was no longer the woman he knew. And maybe I never would be again. "You cheated on me? With him?" He pointed at Dean without looking at him, as if he'd become a figure of no importance. Every word he said was like a knife piercing me, leaving deep wounds in my soul. I could have lied, tried to get out of it, but there was no point. I knew it was over. Our relationship, our marriage, everything we'd built over the years had been destroyed in an instant. "Yes," I whispered. It was the only word I could utter. The world seemed to spin around us, all the sounds and colors becoming a blur. Gregor looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. His eyes filled with pain and disappointment. I couldn't bear the look, looking away. Dean remained silent. His presence became heavy and awkward. He realized, as I did, that now was not the time for excuses or words. "Get out," Gregor said, turning to Dean. Dean hesitated for a second, but then nodded and headed for the exit without a word. The door slammed shut, leaving Gregor and me alone. Now we were facing each other in absolute silence that stretched like an endless abyss. I knew that all was lost. I felt it with every fiber of my being. But somehow there was no fear inside me, only a strange desolation. "Why?" he finally asked. There was pain in his voice, but also despair. He was trying to figure out what had gone wrong, how it had happened. "I don't know," I whispered, even though I knew it wasn't true. I did know. It had started the moment the spark between Gregor and I had disappeared, when he stopped noticing me as a woman and I stopped feeling desirable. But that was only the beginning. Gregor didn't say another word. He walked away, leaving me alone in our house, filled with memories that now seemed unbearable. With each passing second, I felt the emptiness inside me grow. In that moment, I realized that I had not only destroyed our marriage, but also myself. At night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the events of the last few days, Dean, our meetings, every moment we'd given in to temptation. Why had I let it happen? Was it my thirst for something new? Or a desire to feel alive, wanted? I tried to convince myself that it was just a surge of emotion, that now that everything was out I could start over, but it seemed like empty hopes. How could I go back to my past life if everything I knew had changed? The next day Gregor came home. I expected a scandal, yelling, accusations. But he was calm, even too calm. That icy calm gaze was far more frightening than any shouting. "We're getting a divorce," he said coldly, not looking at me. He'd already made his decision, and there was nothing left for me to do but accept it. I looked at him and realized that my world was falling apart. Everything that was so familiar, so stable, was gone. I was on the edge of a precipice and there was no way out. All that was left was to accept the consequences of my actions. A few weeks passed. Gregor packed his things and left. We didn't communicate except through lawyers, discussing the terms of the divorce. The house we had once been happy in now seemed foreign and cold to me. Dean was gone too. I didn't know what became of him after the day everything was revealed. Maybe he felt the same guilt I did. Or maybe it was all just a passing fad for him. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time I walked into the bathroom, memories of the two of us came flooding back. That shower, those moments of passion, they seemed so real, so present. But now they were ghosts of the past that haunted my mind. It had been months since Gregor had left. The silence of the house was no longer frightening, but it was heavy. Every corner, every detail reminded me of what I had lost. The divorce was finalized and I was officially free. But the feeling of this freedom was bitter. Immersed in the everyday, I tried to find myself anew. Work, small trips to the city, meetings with friends who seemed distant now. It all seemed mechanical, without real meaning. There was an emptiness inside me, and no new endeavors could fill it. And yet, deep down, I couldn't forget about Dean. It seemed that every moment with him was imprinted in my memory like smoldering embers that could flare up again. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if things had turned out differently. If we hadn't been caught in the act, if we'd had a chance at something real. But such thoughts only led to the guilt I had grown accustomed to. One morning when I was going through the mail, I saw a letter from Dean. It was unexpected, like a lightning strike. My heart raced faster when I opened it. "Emily, I don't know if I should write, but I can't keep quiet anymore. Everything that's happened between us is keeping me in suspense. I realize that the situation has become difficult for all of us, but I can't forget what we went through together. You probably hate me, or at least blame me for everything. But if you ever want to talk, I'll be waiting. Dean." The words were simple, but each one resonated inside me. Memories of our meetings, of that day in the shower, flashed before my eyes like it was all yesterday. I closed the letter, but I couldn't get it out of my head. It was another week before I decided to reply. All the while, I agonized over whether or not I should open that Pandora's box again. But something deep inside me wanted closure, an understanding of what had happened. My message was short. "Dean, I'm having a hard time too. Maybe we should really talk. Tomorrow night." After I sent the message, I sat staring at the screen for a long time. The reply came almost instantly. "Sure. I'll meet you at the coffee shop on the corner at 7. The next day I spent a long time getting ready. Even though I tried to convince myself it was just a conversation, I knew there was more to it than that. I chose the simplest dress I could find, hoping it would help me stay composed. But my heart was pounding faster and faster as I got closer to my appointment. When I walked into the cafe, Dean was already sitting at a table by the window, waiting for me. He looked almost the same as the day it had all started between us, a slightly disheveled hair, a confident look, but with a hint of fatigue. I sat down across from him, not knowing where to start. "Hi," he said quietly, his voice low, a little husky, as if we hadn't seen each other in decades. "Hi," I replied, nervously fixing a strand of hair. We were silent for a few minutes, avoiding direct stares. Everything seemed so unreal. I couldn't believe I was sitting here with him, discussing what had ruined my life. "I don't know how it all happened," I finally began, trying to comprehend what was happening. "It was weird. A mistake." He looked at me carefully, his eyes full of regret and something else. "Desire?" I couldn't make it out. "I don't understand either," he sighed. "But I can't deny what it was. And I don't regret our moments." My fingers slid nervously over the rim of my coffee cup as I considered his words. "No regrets? And me, could I say the same?" Our conversation continued slowly, intermittently, as if each of us was afraid of saying the extra word that might pull us back into the same vortex. But there was still an unbreakable bond between us. We both felt it. "Did you know that all this could ruin your life?" he asked, looking at me with sudden seriousness. "Yes," I answered honestly. But in that moment it seemed like the only way I could feel something real. He nodded, realizing what I was saying. We were both looking for something more, something to fill the void in our lives. But that void had only widened. "So what now?" he asked. I didn't say anything. What now? What could there be after all this? We'd both lost a lot, and the only thing left was the bitterness of the aftermath. "I don't know," I finally answered. "But maybe we should put it all behind us." Dean looked at me carefully but didn't say anything. I could see in his eyes that he understood too, our past couldn't be undone. "But maybe we can at least start something new with a clean slate." It had been a few weeks since I'd met Dean. We'd agreed to take our time and not complicate things. Still, every time I remembered his words, something dangerous, uncontrollable flared in my heart. Maybe it was just a remnant of passion, the fire that had once brought us together, or maybe it was fear, a fear that I might let myself go beyond reason again. Every day I tried to go about my normal life, but thoughts of Dean came back again and again. Our conversations didn't stop. We started texting, sometimes calling each other. However, I knew that any meetings would be too dangerous. We'd both already been hurt by our past. Was it worth risking it again? But one evening, after a hard day, I couldn't take it. Pouring myself a glass of wine, I scrolled through the news feed on my phone as usual, but everything seemed pointless. My hand reached for the phone on its own and I texted Dean. "Can you come over?" The answer came almost immediately. "When is convenient for you?" And then it started all over again. That moment when you realize that the lines are blurring again, that you're ready to cross the line you've already broken once before. But this time I couldn't stop myself. That evening he arrived. When I opened the door, it only took one look at his face to realize that everything between us was inevitable. We stood across from each other for a few moments, silent. The tension between us was so palpable that it felt like it could have been cut with a knife. I tried to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. "Emily," he said quietly, taking a step toward me. "Are you sure this is what you want?" I stared at him, fighting myself. It was that moment when you realize there's no going back. Any decision would have consequences, and I couldn't afford to be wrong again. But my heart had already made the choice for me. "Yes," I answered, looking away. And that was all that needed to be said. Dean stepped closer, his hands touching my shoulders, and in that moment, everything that had come before our differences, our breakup with Gregor, my pain, all faded away like it didn't matter. All that was left was us. He kissed me, slowly, tentatively, as if giving me a chance to pull back if I suddenly changed my mind. But I couldn't. I'd felt empty for so long, and now, next to him, it felt like all my emotions came back with incredible force. We merged in a kiss, his hands sliding confidently down my back, pulling me closer. I could feel his breath on my skin, his warmth, his passion. We couldn't stop anymore. We ended up in the bedroom, and as our bodies merged, everything fell into place. It was the moment I had been searching for so long, when all my fears and doubts vanished. In that moment, I felt alive again. The next morning I woke up before he did. As I lay in bed watching him sleep, thoughts whirled through my head. On the one hand, I knew that what had happened could ruin my life again. But on the other hand, I couldn't deny that I was happy. For the first time in a long time, I felt real free. When Dean woke up, he looked at me with the same tenderness I'd seen in his eyes yesterday. We didn't speak, words were unnecessary. Everything had already been said by our actions. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, wrapping his arms around me. "Yes," I answered, snuggling against him. "Are you?" He nodded and kissed my forehead. We lay there, enjoying the silence, savoring the fact that this moment was ours alone. But as soon as Dean left, reality started to set in again. I realized that this romance couldn't last forever. We were trapped in our own feelings with no plan for the future. Whatever happened next, we both had to face the consequences. Despite realizing all this, our meetings continued. We spent more and more time together, avoiding talking about what would happen next. But one day I realized that it couldn't go on. I couldn't build a life on deception, on secret meetings and unspoken feelings. It was too painful. One night, as the two of us sat alone at my house, I looked at Dean and decided I needed to put a stop to it. "Dean, we need to talk," I started, pulling myself together. He looked at me warily, expecting something bad. "I can't do this anymore. It's destroying me from the inside out. I love you, but we can't live in this endless cycle of secret meetings and fear of being caught." He was silent for a long time, then nodded. "I understand, Emily. It's hard for me too. I've tried to tell myself I can let it go," Dean finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "But I can't. Every time we part, I think about you. Your face, your scent, your touch. I'm drawn to you and I can't stop it." I looked at him, and in that moment something inside me shook. All this time I'd convinced myself that I could live without him, that this was just a temporary infatuation. But now I saw his pain, his passion, and I realized that we are both in the same position. We are both caught in this irresistible bond that cannot be broken. "You're right," I answered quietly, feeling my doubts fade away. "I can't stop either. I've tried, but every time you're around it escalates. We can't live apart, no matter how hard we try." Dean took my hand, his gaze streaked with determination and desperation. "Then why try? We've tried to be reasonable, tried to break up. But it's always ended the same way. We're drawn to each other, no matter what." Those words were like a key that unlocked all the doors inside me. I could no longer deny that there was more to our connection than just physical attraction. It was something deeper, something that united us on a level I couldn't explain. "I don't know where this will take us," he continued, "but I'm willing to try. Ready to risk everything for us." I looked at him and realized he was telling the truth. This wasn't just infatuation, not just passion. It was a connection that was stronger than both of us. "Me too," I whispered, taking a step toward him. His eyes lit up, and the next moment he was already there. We kissed, and that kiss was full of the uninhibited passion we'd been trying to suppress for so long. Everything happened so fast. We both lost control, as if our bodies had known what we wanted for a long time. We found ourselves in the bathtub, and as the hot water flowed over our bodies, everything that was happening was beyond reason. In that moment, only we existed. The passion simmering between us seemed endless, as if it had been burning in us from the beginning and now had found its way out. Every moment was filled with the power of our feelings. It wasn't just physical intimacy, it was the merging of our souls, our desires. We returned to each other again and again, unable to stop, as if we were afraid it would all end. When it was over, we were left standing under the jets of water, silent, pressing against each other. No more words were needed. We both knew what had happened, and we both realized that no obstacle could break that bond. "We'll get through this," he whispered softly in my ear. "We can do this together."